Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The last stretch of daylight lay weak across the Wyoming frontier, a pale ribbon of fading gold slipping behind the dark pines as Cole Ransom followed the narrow path toward his cabin. Snow drifted in slow, steady flakes that clung to his hat and coat, settling over him like a second layer of winter. The cold pressed deep into everything: the fence rails, the frozen ground, even the breath leaving his mouth in faint white clouds. Cole kept an easy, unhurried pace, the kind he used when nothing waited on him except silence. For nearly 5 years he had lived alone in these woods, tending his small herd, patching fences, and working each day with a calm routine that dulled the memories he didn't want to revisit. He had lost his wife in a violent break-in at their old ranch near Laramie, a night that tore something out of him permanently. The guilt of not reaching her in time clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. So he built this cabin high in the pines, not for comfort, but for distance. Distance from people, from noise, from questions he no longer had answers to. His mission now was simple: survive the winter, keep his animals alive, stay unseen, stay out of trouble. No more towns, no more fights, no more entanglements that could end with someone getting hurt because of him. The woods didn't ask anything from him, and he didn't ask anything from them. That kind of quiet suited him, but as he neared the corral, something in the snow pulled him out of that quiet. Tracks, small, uneven, unsteady, not animal, and not the kind made by a person in good condition. These steps wandered slightly, as if whoever made them stumbled more than walked. Cole's muscles tightened, a quiet alertness rising in him. Unexpected company out here almost never meant anything good. He followed the prints carefully, one hand hovering near the knife sheathed at his belt. Not drawn, but ready. The last thing he wanted was to frighten someone already hanging on by a thread. The trail led toward the far post, where something lay half-buried beneath a drift. He knelt, brushing the snow away from a small figure curled tightly against the cold. A young Apache woman, barely conscious, her skin tinted blue at the edges from exposure. Her dress was torn at the ribs and thigh, the beaded fringe frozen stiff. Her braid, tangled and caught with bits of ice, lay across her shoulder like a rope hardened by winter. When her eyelids fluttered, Cole froze, unsure how she might react if she woke in panic. He knew the violent history between settlers and Apache in these parts, a history built on fear and blood. But none of that mattered when someone was this close to freezing. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I just need a place to stay for one night." Something inside Cole shifted, a buried instinct that told him to help her despite every wall he had built. He didn't want to feel responsible for anyone ever again. But leaving her here wasn't an option. She wouldn't survive an hour. "You're freezing," he muttered, more to himself than to her. When he slid his arms beneath her to lift her, her breath hitched in fear, her muscles tightening under his touch. Cole kept his voice low and steady. "I'm just getting you out of the snow. Nothing else." She didn't resist after that. Her head fell weakly against his chest, and he felt how light she was. Starvation had hollowed her long before the cold found her. Inside the cabin, the air was cold but dry. Cole laid her carefully on the bench beside the stove and crouched to light a fire. His hands worked quickly, flint, kindling, breath-coaxing flame, until warm orange light pushed the shadows back. She held trembling fingers near the growing heat, her nails pale, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Cole grabbed a wool blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched hard at the first touch, eyes wide with panic. He paused, raising his hands slightly so she could see them. "You're safe here," he said, calm and firm. Slowly she breathed again. In the firelight, Cole could finally see the extent of her injuries. Scrapes along her cheeks, a bruise along her jaw, dark marks on her ribs visible through the tears in her dress. Someone had hurt her recently and badly. A snapped necklace hung loosely around her throat, only a few beads remaining. Bitterness rose in him, that same cold anger he had carried since the night his wife died, the anger at men who did harm simply because they believed no one would stop them. "Can you drink?" he asked. She nodded faintly. He handed her a cup slowly, showing each movement so she wouldn't think he meant harm. She drank in small, strained sips. Cole leaned against the table, studying her, not suspiciously, but with the caution of a man who had lived too long in solitude. Who was she running from? How far had she traveled? Were they following her? He didn't ask yet. Her eyelids drooped, exhaustion dragging her towards sleep. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and she tensed again. Cole stepped between her and the wall without touching her, simply placing himself where she could see him. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole didn't answer with words. He just added another log to the stove, letting the fire grow. Tonight, at least, she wasn't alone. The storm eased by morning, leaving a grey sky that hung low over the pines and cast the cabin in dim light. Cole woke early as he always did, but today the silence felt different. It wasn't the empty quiet he had lived with for years. Someone else was breathing inside his walls. Saya sat near the stove, wrapped tightly in the blanket he'd given her, watching the flames as if they were the only thing keeping her present in her own skin. Her face still carried the strain of the night before, bruised jawline, tired eyes, breaths shallow from pain, but the color had returned to her cheeks. She looked alive. When she noticed him watching, she grew still, waiting to see how he moved, as if every gesture might alter her fate. Cole kept his posture relaxed, hands open, voice low. "You warm enough?" he asked. She nodded once. "Better." He reached for his coat. "I have to check the livestock. I won't go far." He said it casually, but she heard the reassurance beneath it. He wasn't leaving her behind. She didn't answer, only pulled the blanket closer and kept her eyes on him until he stepped outside, the cold swallowing him. Outside, the air bit at his face in sharp stings. The corral was quiet except for the restless shifting of horses stamping frost from their hooves. Steam rose from their nostrils as Cole ran hands along their legs and checked the rails for signs of predators. Everything looked normal, but the tracks from the night before remained, a reminder that danger had crossed his land recently. He followed them again, scanning the tree line, instincts tightening with every step. Whoever had hurt Saya had not been careful. Their footprints were deep, uneven, rushed, the kind left by men who grabbed and dragged, not by hunters or trackers, men who didn't expect anyone to interfere. His jaw tensed. He knew those kinds of men. He'd seen them before. The memory of his wife pressed against him like old bruises. Another moment he was too late to stop violence. Another moment that shaped the walls he built around himself. When he returned to the cabin, he found Saya standing on her own now, one hand braced on the table. Her dress hung awkwardly, torn all the way to her hip. Bruises like dark storms marked her ribs. Cole looked away long enough to give her dignity, then set a wool shirt on the table. "You can use this. Helps with the cold." She hesitated, then took it, fingers brushing the fabric, as if she couldn't believe kindness came without a price. She changed behind the bunk curtain while Cole turned toward the window, listening to the soft, strained rustling of fabric. When she emerged, his shirt hung past her hips, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked smaller in it, but less exposed, less vulnerable. She sat near the fire again, holding her ribs gently. Cole poured her water and placed it at her side. "You talk when you feel ready," he said. "No rush." For a while she said nothing, letting the heat sink into her bones. Then her voice came in a soft, flat tone, stripped of emotion. "They traded me more than once." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the blanket tighter. "I ran when I could." She spoke not for pity, but because truth weighed less when shared in pieces. Cole held still, expression unreadable, not interrupting. "I just kept going," she said. "Didn't know where, just not there." Her eyes stared into the fire, as if seeing miles of darkness behind it. Cole felt the weight of those words like stones. "Did they follow you?" he asked quietly. She nodded. It was small but enough. He turned toward the window again, calculating distances, routes, how long it would take for hunters to cross that ridge. "They'll come this way if they're tracking you," he said. "Storm slowed them last night. It won't today." Saya watched him carefully, studying the way his jaw clenched, how he checked the rifle near the wall, how his shoulders squared with preparing. For her, not against her. She had known many kinds of men, but this kind was rare. One who didn't ask what she had to offer before deciding if she was worth protecting. "Why help me?" she asked quietly. Cole paused. The answer lived deep inside his chest, a truth that had sharpened after years of regret. "Because leaving you out there wasn't something I could live with," he said. It was honest, but not all of it. He saw pieces of his past in her bruises, in her fear, in her stubborn will to keep breathing. But he wasn't ready to say more. Saya nodded slightly, accepting the answer without pressing for the rest. She picked up a small needle and thread from his shelf and began stitching the worst tear in her dress with a practiced hand. Survival had taught her to fix what she could. Cole watched her work, noting how she flinched at the smallest sounds outside, her body still tuned to danger. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. She didn't look up. "I've heard that before." Her voice was soft but sharp with old wounds. It wasn't true then. Cole inhaled slowly. "There's no one else here," he said. "Just us." She didn't speak for a few seconds, then looked at him, not as a threat, but as a man she was trying to understand. "What now?" she asked. Cole added another log to the fire, watching the flames grow. "Now," he said, "we make sure this cabin holds. If they come, we'll see them first." Saya didn't argue. She simply stood and moved closer to the stove, the fire warming her face. "I'll help," she said, her voice quiet but certain. Cole nodded once. He didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened for the first time in years. They weren't a team yet. They weren't safe yet. But they were no longer alone. That mattered more than either expected. By afternoon, the wind had strengthened, rattling the shutters in uneven breaths that drifted through the cabin like distant warnings. The air inside was warm, but a thin tension lay beneath everything, stretching between Cole and Saya like a quiet thread neither mentioned. Cole sat at the table sharpening his hunting knife, each slow stroke of the blade whispering across the stone. He wasn't doing it to intimidate her. The rhythm calmed his mind, the way steady work always did when danger loomed close. But Saya watched him with measured attention, her eyes following the arc of the blade, the glint of steel, the precision of his movements. After a moment he paused, not lifting his gaze. "You all right with this?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Yes, I've seen worse." There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth learned the hard way. He nodded once and resumed the sharpening, slower now, giving her room to settle into the quiet. The cabin glowed with firelight, shadows swaying gently along the walls, and the closeness of their shared silence created a strange sense of peace despite everything waiting outside. Saya sifted through the herbs she'd found on his shelf, separating them into small piles on the table. Roots for pain, leaves for swelling, ones that offered nothing but a sharp, clean scent that reminded her faintly of home. Cole watched her work, noticing the practiced way her hands moved. "You know how to use those," he said. She nodded. "My mother taught me before." The rest of her sentence fell away, swallowed by the flames and whatever memory tightened her throat. Cole didn't push her to finish. Instead, he set his knife down and stepped outside to check the daylight. The cold hit him instantly, sharp enough to sting his skin. He scanned the tree line, noting how quiet the forest felt, a wrong kind of quiet, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He'd lived too long alone not to recognize it. He examined the old footprints half hidden under new snow, but no fresh tracks broke the surface. Still, he sensed movement out there, a presence just beyond sight. When he returned to the cabin, Saya's shoulders visibly eased at the sound of the door, as if she'd feared he wouldn't come back. She didn't hide the relief in her eyes, though she quickly looked away. Cole shook the snow from his coat and hung it by the door. "Nothing out there yet," he said, "but it's too quiet." She nodded, trusting his instincts. Her life had depended on reading men's intentions, and she could tell Cole wasn't a man who spoke without certainty. He motioned her to the table and slid the knife toward her. "You should know how to hold it in case I'm not close when you need it." She approached cautiously, eyes on him more than the blade. He placed it gently in her hand. "Go on." She wrapped her fingers around the hilt, adjusting her grip automatically. Cole leaned slightly closer. "Don't squeeze. You lose control that way." He hovered his hand near hers, silently asking permission. She gave a small nod. He adjusted her wrist carefully, his touch brief but steady. Like this. Straight, firm. She practiced until her hand no longer shook, repeating the motion with growing confidence. Every time she looked up, Cole met her gaze, not with judgment, but with a calm assurance she had never received before. "You learn quick," he said. "I've had to," she replied softly. Something unspoken passed between them then. Recognition, respect, the beginnings of trust formed in shared silence. The tension between them shifted after that, becoming something quieter, but more present. As evening settled, they worked together again, reinforcing the door. Cole hammered a plank into place while Saya held it, her fingers gripping the rough wood. Each strike echoed through the cabin, but she didn't flinch. Pain pulsed through her ribs, but she stood straight. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked between blows. Cole paused, the hammer resting against the frame as he stared at the wood. "Peace is easier when nobody's close enough to lose." Saya lowered her gaze, understanding the weight behind those words without needing more explanation. "I used to live near people too," she whispered. "It didn't keep me safe." He looked at her for a long moment, then continued working without forcing her to say more. When the door was secured, the cabin glowed with warm lantern light. Saya prepared a small pot of stew, her movements careful but practiced. The smell filled the room slowly, simple, warm, grounding. Cole watched from the table, rubbing his hands to warm the cold from his bones. When she handed him a bowl, their fingers brushed, and she didn't pull away this time. They ate in a silence that felt different now, less like two strangers sharing space and more like two wounded souls learning how to breathe in the same room. Saya moved to the window, staring into the dark woods, her shadow soft against the lantern glow. "They'll come," she murmured. Cole stood beside her, close enough for her to feel the heat from his shoulder, grounding her. "Then we'll be ready," he said. She turned slightly toward him, her voice low. "You don't even know me." Cole kept his gaze on the trees. "I know enough." His answer softened something inside her. She stood there a moment longer, steadying her breath. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls, but inside something fragile and real was growing. Trust, safety, a bond formed through shared fear and quiet courage. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but neither of them was alone anymore. Snow thickened again by morning, drifting across the yard in slow waves that softened the world into a near-silent white. The cold pressed against the cabin walls, slipping through every seam despite the work they had done the day before. Inside, the fire burned strong, its glow pushing back the dim winter light. Saya stood near it first, warming her hands, while Cole pulled on his coat to begin the day's work. "You stay inside until I check the ridge," he said. His voice held no command, only caution. She didn't argue, but her eyes tracked him all the way to the door, her shoulders tightening as if her body feared abandonment more than the cold itself. Cole noticed and paused before stepping out. "I'll be back," he told her. Plain, certain. Not a reassurance out of pity, but a promise. Then he left, and the cabin seemed to exhale with the closing of the door, settling into the uneasy quiet of waiting. Outside, the world looked deceptively peaceful. Hard-packed snow stretched across the yard, the trees painted in frost, the sky washed out and heavy with more storm. Cole walked the length of the corral, boots sinking into new snow, the horses restless beneath his hand. Their breath steamed into the cold air and they shifted uneasily. Animals always sensed danger before people did. Cole scanned the tree line, looking for broken branches, disturbed snow, anything out of place. Nothing moved, but the woods felt watched, their silence too careful. He'd learned long ago that the worst threats were the ones hiding inside quiet. When he returned inside, he found Saya arranging the firewood into neat piles, sweeping the snow tracked in through the draft, moving with purpose. She still flinched at the sharper sounds outside, but the panic no longer took her over completely. When she heard the door open, relief flickered through her features like a candle's breath. "No tracks yet," Cole said, shaking the snow from his coat. "But they're out there. I can feel it." Saya didn't question him. She had felt danger long before he found her. She approached the table where he had laid out rope, nails, and spare planks. "Tell me what to do," she said. not as someone begging to be useful, but as someone refusing to be helpless ever again. Cole studied her ribs, still stiff, still painful, but her eyes held steady determination. "You can seal the seams," he said. "Sacks by the shelf, stuff them into the cracks, keeps the draft out, makes it harder for sound to escape too." She got to work immediately, pushing scraps of cloth into the gaps along the walls, her breath steady despite the pain. She paused when her sleeve slipped back, revealing a bruise dark as ink along her arm. Cole saw it, the hammer in his hand falling still. "They did that to you?" he asked quietly. She kept working, but her voice held no tremble. "Yes," he swallowed. "Is that the worst of it?" She paused then, not meeting his eyes. "No." The simple honesty struck him harder than any details could. He didn't ask more. Some scars didn't need words to be understood. Cole stepped beside her, helping pack another seam. "You're safe here," he said quietly. It wasn't a promise he made lightly. She looked at him for a moment, searching his expression not for softness, but for truth. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He leaned his weight against the wall, hammer resting loosely in his grip. "Because no one helped my wife when she needed it," he said. "I live with that every day." Saya's breath caught, not out of sympathy but understanding. She knew what it felt like when the world looked away. She continued working, her movements calmer now, as if something heavy inside her had settled. Cole handed her the small hunting knife he'd shown her earlier. "Carry this," he said, "always." She wrapped her fingers around the handle, repeating his earlier instruction. "Steady grip, not too tight." "I won't freeze again," she said. "Not like before." He nodded. "Good." Later, near dusk, they stepped outside together to gather more wood. The cold stung their faces instantly, but Saya moved with careful purpose, determined not to slow him down. She bent to pick up a piece of pine, but her foot slipped on a hidden patch of ice. Cole caught her by the forearm before she fell, steadying her with one hand on her waist. She stiffened instinctively, bracing for pain or force, but Cole's grip was controlled, protective, gentle. His breath hovered near her cheek in the cold air. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the shock of being held without harm. He released her slowly, making sure she was balanced first. Their eyes met, the moment lingering between them. Quiet, tentative, charged with a trust neither expected to form so quickly. She held his gaze as if memorizing the truth in it. Back inside, the fire filled the cabin with warm light again. Saya stirred the pot of stew, wincing when her ribs pulled, but refusing to sit until Cole insisted. "Rest," he said gently. "You've done enough today." She obeyed, settling onto the bench while he took over the stirring. When she handed him the bowl later, their fingers touched for the briefest moment, and this time neither pretended not to notice. They ate in silence, but it was a silence built from shared breath, shared danger, shared hours that had pulled them from strangers into something closer. After the meal, Cole checked the locks one more time. "They might not come tonight," he said, "but they're close." Saya moved to the fire, her shadow stretching long across the floorboards. "If they come," she said quietly, "I won't hide behind you. I'll stand with you." Cole met her eyes. "I know." The simple words carried more certainty than any vow. Outside, the wind pushed at the logs again, but inside the cabin stood firm, warmed by fire and something deeper, two people who had survived too much alone, now bracing themselves together for what came next. Night settled over the Wyoming woods like a closing hand, turning the snow outside into a pale, colorless sea, broken only by the dark lines of trees. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low but steady, casting a soft orange glow over the rough-hewn walls and the shapes of two people who had stopped being strangers without quite realizing when it happened. Cole sat with his back against the stove, rifle resting across his knees, eyes trained on the shuttered window. He hadn't slept more than an hour in days, yet his focus stayed sharp, fueled by a mix of old guilt and new purpose. Saya lay on the bunk, half-curled beneath the blankets, her breathing slow but uneven. Pain still tugged at her ribs every time she shifted, small sounds breaking from her without her consent. Even in sleep, her body remembered danger. A sudden crack from the woods cut through the quiet. Cole's head lifted, muscles tensing in one smooth motion. The sound wasn't random. Too sharp, too close. Saya's eyes snapped open instantly, years of fear-trained reflex waking her quicker than rest ever could. "That was close," she whispered, already on her feet, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a fragile shield. Cole rose, voice low. "Stay quiet." Another sound followed. 2 slow crunches of snow, measured steps of someone who liked being deliberate. Cole moved to the narrow gap near the window, peered through and saw a shadow moving along the ridge. One man on foot testing the distance between the trees and the cabin. The figure paused, turned toward them, studying the ground as if searching for tracks. "He's guessing we're here," Cole murmured. "Not sure yet, but he will be." Saya stepped close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm without her meaning to. Fear had always made her want to move away from people, but tonight it pushed her nearer to him, to the one solid thing between her and the men who wanted her back. "What do we do?" she breathed. Cole didn't move from the window. "We wait," he said. "If he comes closer, I'll deal with him. If he doesn't, he'll go back and tell them he thinks he saw something." They stood like that for a long stretch of heavy minutes, pressed together by circumstance and a danger that had chased her for miles. The man on the ridge eventually stopped, stooped low, then straightened. He turned away from the cabin and slipped back into the trees, swallowed by the dark. Cole stayed still until he could no longer sense movement, then stepped away from the window, shoulders dropping in a slow exhale. "He'll go back to whoever he's with," he said. "They'll circle wider tomorrow." Saya's fingers tightened around the blanket. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she whispered. Cole turned to her fully, eyes shadowed by firelight but steady. "If they come here, that's on them, not you. You didn't choose this." She shook her head. "They never stop. You don't know what they're like." His jaw clenched. "I know enough," he replied. He had seen men like that in border towns, men who treated people as property and called it business, men who laughed loudest when someone else flinched. He wouldn't let those kinds of men cross his threshold. The hours stretched thin after that, but the danger outside made the small cabin feel sharper, more focused. Saya sat on the bench while Cole warmed the herbs she had prepared earlier, carefully grinding them and wrapping them in cloth. It struck her that he had listened when she'd explained their uses, remembered her exact instructions without mocking her knowledge or dismissing it as women's remedies the way others had. When he pressed the warm bundle gently against her ribs, she flinched at the first touch but didn't pull away. His hands were rough from years of work, scattered with old scars, but his touch was steady, careful, respectful. "You're not afraid," she said quietly, watching his face. "I am," Cole answered. "I've just had practice moving through it." She studied him, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion he refused to acknowledge. "I trust you," she said, the words leaving her before she could stop them. Cole went still, his hand resting over the cloth against her ribs. He didn't smile or look away. "You should sleep," he said softly. "We'll need our strength." "What about you?" she asked. "I'll rest when I can. I'll be here." There was something in the way he said it that sounded like more than a promise about the night. It sounded like an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. She lay back on the bunk, watching him as he resumed his post near the stove, rifle close at hand, eyes on the window. Her breathing eventually slowed, but his never relaxed completely, always tuned to the whisper of the snow and the dark. Morning crept in slowly, thin grey light sliding through the cracks in the shutters. Cole hadn't slept, but he rose as if he had, body moving on old habits carved by years of hard days and harder nights. Saya woke to find him standing at the window again, silhouette outlined by dim light and the faint glow of dying embers. "You didn't sleep," she said. It wasn't a question. He shrugged one shoulder. "Didn't need to." She could see the truth anyway, the shadows under his eyes, the stiff way he rolled his shoulders. But she let it pass. "Did you hear them?" she asked. "They patrolled the ridge," he said. "Didn't come close." Relief flickered through her, but dread followed quickly behind it. "They'll come again," she murmured. "Maybe," he answered, "but we'll be ready." She didn't question the we. It felt natural now, as if somewhere between the fire, the knives, the herbs, and the sleepless night, they had become something more than two people trapped by circumstance. The sky outside darkened faster than it should have as the day wore on, heavy clouds dragging low, promising more snow. They stepped outside together to bring in more wood, moving with the practiced rhythm that had become their quiet routine, his arms loaded with heavier logs, hers carrying smaller pieces, ribs aching but not slowing her. Halfway across the yard, she stopped. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Cole paused, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second, listening not with his ears but with the worn instincts of a man who had spent years alone in the wild. The air felt tighter, the silence heavier, like the world was holding its breath. "They're close," he said. They brought the wood inside and barred the door, the simple thud of the latch sounding louder than usual. Saya stood near the stove, every muscle coiled, while Cole returned to the window. It didn't take long. Shapes emerged from the tree line, 3 men on horseback moving with practiced ease, scanning the ground, the cabin, the surrounding snow. They weren't lawmen. Cole could see that in the looseness of their posture, in the way they sat their saddles like men who believed nothing in front of them had the right to say no. 3, Cole murmured. There might be more behind them. Saya pressed her back against the wall, fingers clutching the edge of the blanket, heart pounding hard enough that she was sure they'd hear it. "If they come for me, I'll face them," she said. "I won't run this time." Cole stepped away from the window and turned to her, voice firm. "You already survived them once. That's enough. You stay behind me." She saw the resolve in his eyes, the way his fear didn't make him shrink, but sharpened him instead. This wasn't a man planning to hand her over to save himself. "You could send me away," she whispered. "Lead them off. Keep your life simple again." Cole stared at her, something like anger and disbelief flaring in his gaze. "You think I pulled you out of the snow just to throw you back when trouble showed its teeth?" he asked quietly. "I'm not letting them take you, not while you're under my roof." The men circled lower along the ridge, keeping just far enough that the cabin door wasn't in easy rifle range but close enough to study tracks and count windows. Cole moved back to the narrow slit at the window, watching every shift of their shoulders, every slow step of their horses. Saya came to stand behind him, close enough that he could feel her breath on his shoulder. The men stopped about 60 yards out, spoke among themselves in low voices, then one dismounted and crouched to inspect the snow. Cole's fingers tightened around the rifle stock. Saya whispered, "If they come, you'll get hurt." "Maybe," he said, "but not half as bad as they'll regret it." She couldn't help it. A flicker of something like fierce pride stirred in her chest at the calm certainty in his tone. The dismounted man finally straightened, spat into the snow and climbed back into his saddle. All 3 turned their horses away from the cabin, riding slow and deliberate toward the lower trail, following their own tracks south. Cole stayed perfectly still until the last flicker of movement vanished into the trees and the snow swallowed them whole. Only then did he let his shoulders drop, a long, quiet breath leaving him. "They're gone," he said. "For now." Saya's knees buckled with a wave of relief so sharp it almost hurt. She caught herself on the table, chest heaving. Cole crossed the room in a few steps, his boots dull against the wood. Saya looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and something deeper, something warm and trembling just beneath the surface. "You stayed," she whispered, "even when they came this close." He reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair away from her face, the touch gentle, careful, as if asking one more time if she'd let him. "I told you I would," he said. "I'll stay." Her breath caught as she stepped closer, the space between them finally closing. Her hands came to rest against his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the heat of him, the worn fabric of his shirt. He lowered his head and pressed a slow, deliberate kiss to her forehead first, sealing every unspoken promise he'd made in the last days. Then she lifted her face, and their lips met. No rush, no hunger, just a deep, lingering certainty. A kiss that said they had survived something together, and that what waited beyond this moment would be faced side by side. When they parted, Saya's voice came soft but clear. "Can I stay?" she asked. "Not just for one night. Not because I'm running. Because I feel safe with you." Cole's hands rested lightly on her shoulders, steady and sure. "You stay as long as you want," he said. "And if you want to stay for good, we'll make it for good." Her heart stumbled, then steadied. "You mean marry?" she whispered. He didn't hesitate. "Two people choosing each other," he said. "No one owning you. No one trading you again. Just us." They married quietly 2 mornings later, with the world wrapped in fresh snow and the sun climbing slowly over the pines. No preacher, no papers, no witnesses, just two people standing in the yard outside the cabin that had taken them in when the world had turned cold. Cole slipped a simple silver band onto Saya's finger, the one that had once belonged to his late wife. He held her hand as he did it, eyes open, offering the truth without hiding from it. "This ring belonged to my past," he said, voice low. "I give it to you now because my future is here." Saya's eyes shone with a quiet depth that spoke of everything she had lost and everything she was choosing. "I'm yours because I choose to be," she replied. No fear, no trembling, just conviction. He drew her into a warm embrace, the cold air drifting around them while the cabin stood solid behind their backs, the same place where she had first collapsed in the snow, half frozen and afraid. Now it would be the place where they built a life. Inside, the fire burned steady. Outside, the only tracks leading away from the cabin were the ones left by the men who hadn't dared to push farther. The danger was gone, for now. The questions that once haunted them had quieted. What remained was simple and powerful. Two people who had been broken by the world choosing each other anyway, building a home from survival, trust, and quiet love. Whatever storms winter still held, they would face them together.